All right, I hit record and I'm with Claire Taylor. Claire, I know you know all this, but I'm just going to run through it real quick. You are, I would call you the Enneagram Whisperer for authors. Is that a fair title for you? Which I'm super excited about talking to you because have you, I mean, we've talked before, but I have been and am a little obsessed with the Enneagram. So
Mhm.
um yeah, and I love what you're doing with it. So you have a podcast now called What If for Authors, which is
Mhm.
amazing. You've got two books out, Reclaim Your Author Career and Sustain Your Author Career, both around the Enneagram. You have a 5-week course called the Liberated Author course. You're
Liberated writer,
doing,
yes.
did I say that wrong?
It's a liberated writer. That's all right.
Liberated Writer. I'm sorry. Yeah. You've got several workshops and master classes people can sign up, and you're doing one-on-one consulting around the
Mhm.
Enneagram. Did I get everything? Or on the Enneagram? I know I didn't
There
get
are
everything
probably
too.
some other free things that I throw in there. I'm really
Nice.
bad about having an idea and immediately implementing it and then being like, why did I add this?
I love that. That's great. Um, yeah, so thanks for coming on to talk. I guess I just want to start off with so a lot of authors, I think, don't, well, my experience is that a lot of authors don't really know what the Enneagram is.
Mhm.
And they're kind of like, because um Becca Syme is a superhero that we should all listen to, but has also like successfully, taught everybody Strengths Finder. Um, they know their strengths numbers. Like they know they're like, okay, these are my top 10 strengths. But we start talking about an Enneagram, they have no idea what it is. So would you mind like just talking for a second about what the Enneagram is and what it does differently than like a normal personality test?
Yeah, so the Enneagram is just a personality framework. It's been built by a bunch of much smarter people than me over decades. And so I just get to kind of pick it up and run. But what it's really measuring is core motivation.
Hmm.
And that core motivation breaks down into core fear and core desire. So just to make it, kind of get all of the complications out of the way, it's measuring what is your core fear.
Hmm.
And so that's really important for authors, and it does different things from something like Myers-Briggs or, strengths. I think Enneagram and strengths work really well together because if anyone's familiar with strengths, they know there's kind of the basements and balconies of each strength. But what puts you in the basement?
Hmm.
And the answer to that, you can find it in the Enneagram because it's the level of fear and your awareness and of the fear that is driving you, that the one core fear above all the other fears. When that gets activated and when we lack the self-awareness of what that is for us, then it's really controlling us in ways we don't see, and it's really hard to get out of that basement of our strength.
I think a lot of people, I love that. I think a lot of people come to it expecting kind of like a personality measure. So
Mm-hmm.
they're like, but wait, this isn't telling me if I'm shy or if I'm
Right.
extroverted or if I'm, would you mind talking a little bit about how that understanding of like base understanding of personality plays out in the Enneagram?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so from this core fear, our brains are very much evolved to sense danger. That is why we are still here today. So our connection to our fear is very, very strong. It pretty much overrides everything else. If our fear is active, that is what our attention is going toward.
Hmm.
So from this fear, we filter in all of the information we get in the world. All the stories, all the beliefs are filtered through this fear. It's called our perceptual filter. And so that perceptual filter over time, if we're unaware of what information our brain is deeming relevant to our fear,
Hmm.
then we aren't aware of our worldview and that we even have a worldview. So we don't see that other people have different worldviews that are equally as valid, created from their own perceptual filter of, say, a different Enneagram type. So from our fear arise these patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And so we create kind of this cloud, and there's a lot of similarities within the types. So you can sometimes observe someone over a long period of time and have a pretty good guess based on the words they use, the actions they take, the decisions they make, what that core fear is that's driving them. Um, and so in that way, you'll have people who are the same type who have very different backgrounds. One may be extroverted, the other's introverted, but there's still these patterns in this worldview that they share. And it's so strong and so deeply rooted that it's the water that each of us are swimming in. And so if you tell a fish, hey, you're in water, they're like, what are you talking about? Right? What water? You know?
Yeah.
And so that's really what we start to do when we do this work is figuring out, first of all, that we have a worldview,
Mm,
seeing how our fear has been shaping our perception. If you're looking, if your fear is that you're going to be betrayed and you're not aware of that, you're going to be looking for all of the betrayals. And suddenly your worldview is going to be that people betray each other a lot, right?
yeah. Yeah. And
And
that's
then
totally, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. But if you are looking for, if you have dealt with this fear, if you're managing this fear, and you can consciously say, I'm going to look for all of the ways people show up for each other, then you're actually taking your own worldview in your hand, and you're starting to gain other data and more evidence, and your worldview can shift to something much more open. And in your author career, that's going to give you a whole lot more options that you maybe have not seen before. And so, if we go for long enough as authors without addressing this fear, we just get more and more tunnel vision and our options close off. So, those tactics that were working, when they stop working, we feel like we're completely out of options. But there's
Mm.
so much more. We just have to sort of work on ourselves to be able to see that.
Yeah. And I love that kind of description you're giving. I I came across the Enneagram first when my wife and I were like trying to figure out our marriage, like when we were
Yep.
when I was much younger. And what you're saying about the glasses and the worldview is so true for us because we're very different types. I'm on the Enneagram is 6, so everything for me is what you're saying is about like betrayal, who's with me, who's against me. And like
Mm-hmm.
for me, like my worldview, my glasses, there's really no right or wrong. Everything's gray.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
more about where are we going there together? Or are we not going there together? Like I'll go any direction with the like group that I'm united to at the time. For
Mm-hmm.
her, though, she's an 8. So everything was about being controlled. She was like terrified of being controlled. She was, always pushing back, constantly wanting to assert strength because she like wanted to let everybody know that like, hey, I am not vulnerable or powerless. Like I am, a force of nature. And so we really had to figure out, especially when we were like having important discussions as a couple and like really like getting that like deep fear stuff going, why we were responding so differently, why we were reacting to each other the way we did. Like it was just a really
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it really helped us understand that. And then I found when I got into my author career, coming to understand that like as a 6 I really did see things as like whose team am I on and how that was really
Mm-hmm.
impacting the choices I made. And like, you know, well, for example, like when I first started choosing indie versus trad, I just had a knee jerk. It wasn't a rational decision. It was like
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is a team of people. I like this team of people. This team of people has been nice to me. I am an indie author. Right. Like, but
Yeah.
like coming to understand later, like looking at it like, oh, of course that's the decision I made. That's the community I was with at the time. That's what like, so I united to those people and like
Mm-hmm.
being able to understand that decision, pull back a little bit and decide like, was that the best decision? Like, but anyway, yeah, yeah. How did it impact? Like, did you find understanding your number and your type impacted your author choices?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So I am a 1. It's often called the reformer. And like you said, you're kind of determining who's with me, who's not.
Mm-hmm.
My lens that I was looking through is what is right, what is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the lens of the 1. It's about the core fear is about being bad. So there were a lot of things. There are a lot. You just run out of options very quickly if you need something to be morally pure
Mm-hmm.
before you can take that path, right? Because we don't live in a society where anyone's hands are clean, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, I would like to, you know, not support a company that exploits its workers in warehouses, but
Mm-hmm.
Amazon's where the money's at, right? So these you can get really stuck if you over attach labels of right and wrong. And so that was one thing I was doing at the start, was really trying to find like what is the right path, when of course there is no right path.
Mm-hmm.
There is no right or wrong in most of the things that we do, right? There's no right way to write a book. There's no
You're speaking of
right way to
sixes
get you
language right
covered.
now. There's no right way. Yeah.
Yeah. And so once I could start taking those labels off, I was like, oh, there's so many more options. But also there's this thing, if you're a one, that you are so terrified of criticism.
Mm,
And so if you aren't aware that that is happening, you don't realize just how intense it is. It's what's called the vulnerability of the
mm,
one, is criticism. And so you're constantly trying to do things just so, threading the needle just so, to avoid any sort of criticism, to constantly live above reproach, and that's exhausting.
mm.
And it makes the book process very slow.
Yeah.
So, so you end up trying to publish fast, especially if you're indie, you're trying to churn these books out because it's like, all right, this is the model. Like the faster I can turn this out, the more I can sell, that sort of thing. And in the meantime, you're meeting this resistance of everything's got to be perfect. I've got to get
Mm,
everything right. And so you're just white knuckling the whole process if you're not careful. So I did a lot of white knuckling early in my career and burned myself out
mm,
because I was trying to do things fast and perfect. Um, and so that's, that's one of the things that I see a lot with, particularly with ones,
mm.
is you're trying to move as fast as someone who doesn't have as impossibly high standards as you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so, I have a lot of my best friends are ones, and we talk all the time about like you're talking about, like handling criticism and like trying to determine the right path. As a six, I don't actually take anything as criticism. You actually have to tell me you're criticizing me, because I hear it all as just potential options of directions we could go. So you're like, oh, this isn't right. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's not right. We should probably, like, here's five other options of the directions we could go. And it doesn't matter to me which one's right or wrong. It drives my one friends crazy. They're like, I need you to pick a side. I'm like, I don't have a side. It's all, yeah. So you're like, part of what what I love about where you are right now is you're in this really critical role, I think, for the author community, because things are changing, and change drives us to these like
Yeah.
core fears. It drives us to this place of like uncertainty, unsettledness. What kind of, and by changing, I'm talking about the publishing industry and how like
Mm-hmm.
everything seems to be constantly in flux. Um, how are you seeing the different numbers respond to this? Like, how are you seeing their different emotions kind of manage this change? And like, talk us through, like, hey, what are some things you're seeing, and how can some of the different types start to kind of not maybe embrace, but also manage their own responses to what's happening?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the fear is notching up, and it's not just the changes in the publishing industry. I wish it was in isolation, but there's a lot going on right now.
There is, yeah,
Um,
there's a lot happening in the world. Yeah,
the world is happening too fast in
yeah.
general. We're all waiting for that precedented moment, but it's not happening. So everyone's fear is amping up,
Mhm.
which is, I think, a great opportunity for us to address the things that we were pretending weren't there for a long time.
Mm,
So, if you're up for the challenge, this is a huge moment of potential transformation for your author career. It is time for you to face down all of those little cracks that are now becoming chasms in your
mm,
business and say, okay, I can't just keep, slapping a band aid on this. I have to do some fundamental change to my business model and
mm.
to the way that I work to make sure my patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving are sustainable. So I think that there's a huge opportunity in that. Do I think that everyone's rising to it? Well, if they were, I wouldn't be needed.
Yeah.
So here are some things that I'm noticing. It's really just sort of emphasizing everyone's patterns. The change, the fear, it kicks everyone's patterns into overdrive.
Mm,
So the patterns that may have been working for us to get us some have stopped becoming as effective. And so you either need to shift to something new,
mm,
or your natural response is usually to hit the accelerator. Say,
mm.
well, it was working before, it's not working as much, but if I hit the accelerator on it, maybe I'll get a little bit more juice out of this.
Sure, yeah.
Maybe that's what's needed. And you will hit the accelerator and drive the car straight off a cliff into burnout if you're not careful. So that is what everyone is heading toward.
Mm,
Everyone who is not really tackling. Some people are like, yeah, I'm kind of looking at this. I'm like, no, you got to be ruthless about these patterns that are no longer working for you right now. Um, but I do see that like ones are having a whole lot more tension, want to just be done with it
mm,
because there's no way to do it perfectly. There's no way to avoid criticism. A lot less time spent on social media because that's where ones don't like social media for the most part anyway.
yeah.
So
Feeling
those
like
who,
really frozen of like what's the right
yeah.
way, can't figure it out.
Oh yeah, and
Yeah.
everything if you're in a fear state as a one, everything feels like criticism.
Hmm.
So don't go on the internet. Not a safe place for you. So that's the reformer. Type two is the helper. These people are having to figure out boundaries quick
Mm,
because the helpers have been getting what they need by giving. And everyone is in a state where people are locking up their resources. So people are not
mm,
necessarily reciprocating like they used to, but the helpers are helping even more. And they're
mm.
trying to save everyone.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of helpers trying to save adults from themselves, which is impossible. So sometimes you gotta say I'm here and then let them do their thing, right?
Hmm.
So helpers really need to be working on boundaries, or else
Mm,
the sphere is going to burn them out. The achievers, the threes, they are they get their eye on the prize so much and they're so used to finding a way to the goal, but there are fewer and fewer ways to that goal now without stepping out of integrity. So
yeah. They
that's the thing
remind me
that
of like the
three.
Captain America type. The like, you know.
Yeah, well, yeah, so it's just this focus, and they're very
Hmm.
savvy, they're very effective people, but when there is less opportunity for rewards for the savviness, and the efficiency,
Mm,
this can veer into exploitation of self, which is
mm,
really the damage, but also of other people and resources. So threes want to watch out for that because that's a moment where you may not be welcome in the
mm.
community if you
Yeah.
go too far on that. Um, Fours are having a really hard time. These are the individualists. Although I think it's really the moment for fours to shine if they can watch out for their fear, because the fours like to do something different.
Mm,
And so the market is being flooded with a lot of the same stuff, right? And so it's really spinning a wheel, but your weird thing might be the breakout hit that people need, right? It might be the
yeah.
fresh thing. As long as the four cannot take personally any drop in sales. So sometimes fours take the drop in sales very personally,
Mm,
and then that can be very demotivating.
yeah.
Fives, these are the individualists. They are going to be withdrawing and isolating in the fear. And that is not what you need to do. Do not lock down all your resources right now. You can be smart and savvy about it, but locking down your resources is a fear response.
Mm,
Cutting people out of your life because it's too much energy to stay connected is a fear response.
mm.
So then what happens is the five is now responsible for providing for themselves completely, which is not what humans were built to do, right? So we really, if you're a five, you want to watch out for the fear of isolation. And I know things are getting ugly in certain pockets of the author community. Just don't be in those pockets, but work hard to stay connected to the healthy parts of the community that don't drain you and that give you energy.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of
Um,
intent. I love the intentionality you're giving there around like, hey, you want to withdraw, so make conscious choices about where you're going to be and what's healthy for you.
Yeah, because with withdrawing, that is not the answer.
Yeah.
That makes you very lonely and empty. So
Hmm.
we don't want to do that because it's not great for creativity. And then
Yeah.
the sixes, Jeff, you can probably attest to this. Sixes are looking at everything that can go wrong and all of the things that may be crashing down
Hmm.
and trying to figure out who they can trust right now. And when that really kicks up and we're not aware of it, and you're probably not experiencing this, Jeff, because you've been doing this work for a while, but sometimes the sixes
Give me too much credit.
will will be a little bit sensitive to any sign of betrayal or a lack of
Hmm.
responsibility and cut that person out.
Yep.
Right? I cannot trust any of them. I'm throw the whole human out, right?
Hmm.
Um, and if you do that, you'll find that you are feeling less and less supported, which is the core fear of the six.
Yeah.
So the
We all have our
loyalists,
list of like people that like You're now on my like the I think about the like Billy Madison list of people to kill. Like every six has their like list on a wall somewhere of like people who've betrayed me. And you're totally right. In times of fear, we're just like writing down everybody's name. We're like, all right, well now you're on my list too. Yeah.
Right, right. And then the world feels very scary, and then it kind of is this perpetuating
Mm-hmm.
cycle of the fear, right? Now, the sevens, these are the enthusiasts. If you are a seven, be wary of all of the escape exits you're looking at. Um, Switching to a new genre is not necessarily the answer,
Yeah.
right? Looking at a new career, just just take a few deep breaths, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the sevens are trying to avoid pain and deprivation. And so they are very much like, well, if this is becoming painful, which it very much is for a lot of us, I got to get out of here,
Yeah.
right? Rather than building up that tolerance for the pain.
And there's that
Um,
like snatching the next new thing. The next new like
yes,
let me just grab that next new thing and run as
yes.
hard to that as I can.
And the
Yeah.
desire for the core desire for satisfaction that the sevens have can never be met if you are never seeing anything through,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then it just becomes this treadmill. Um, Eights are trying to force things that aren't working right now. So uh, if you are an eight and your ads are not working, stop throwing money at them. Amazon loves when you force things. They love when you force the ads, right? Facebook, every ad platform is
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, you should just try a little bit more. You should bully us with your money.
Yeah.
Um, so that's where I would look out if you're an eight is things that were working before and have stopped working. Trying to force them is burning your energy. So it
Yep.
may be a time to go to others for some help,
That's right.
right? Something like
And
that.
every eight listening to this just said, "You can't tell me what to do, Claire. I will fight you."
Hey, you know what? I'll fight him back. I got a lot of eight in me.
Yeah,
I got a lot of eight and I've got a long reach.
yeah. My wife and I, when just going because she's an eight, and I know her so well and the type through her, we had to learn that like as a six, I'm like conflict avoidant. I like never want to fight, always, and
Mm-hmm.
but she feels closest to people when she fights with them. So I
Mm-hmm.
had to learn like, okay, sometimes I just need to fight and that way at the end of it we'll
Mm-hmm.
feel close, but we got to get the fight. Yeah,
Yeah.
avoiding
I
the
love
conflict, she was getting angrier and angrier.
I love coaching eights because I get to just say things and
Yeah,
they want to fight and I'm like, I'm ready to fight. Like it's 3 p.m. I'm ready to fight,
that's
you
right.
know?
That's really funny. Yeah, sorry,
And
I
then
threw you off kilter there.
no,
Yeah.
no, you're good. Yeah, give me a little curveball. It's
Yeah.
fine. And then nines, the peacemakers, are going to withdraw.
Mhm.
Nines are going to disappear into themselves. Are going to say it's not that big of a deal. My career's not that big of a deal. Now's not the time to try. I don't want to rock the boat, right? So nines, the fear tells them that it's not a big enough deal to engage with their vulnerability of conflict. So, where the eights love conflict and see it as a bonding exercise, the nines are terrified of it. And
Mhm.
so the nines will avoid it at all costs. And there is a lot of conflict happening right now.
So I'm gonna when my adult son was first introduced to the Enneagram, we were listening to a book on tape in the car, and they started describing a six, and he started like laughing to himself. And I turned around and I was like, you resonating with some of this? He's like, oh yeah, that's what's that. They were talking specifically about something sixes do called the inner committee, which is like,
Mm-hmm.
and he started laughing about it. So I'm an author. I'm listening to this. You just described one of the numbers. Like, let's say you just described the
Mm-hmm.
nine, and all of my like feels happened where I'm like, oh, that feels like me. I am hiding. I'm just not. Instead of doing my writing time, I'm like scrolling TikTok, and I like
Mm-hmm.
because it makes me not like have to face that intensity. Where do we start looking besides signing up for one-on-one coaching with you? Where do we start looking for health? Like how do if we recognize the problem, what would you say are the first
Mm-hmm.
steps to like moving forward?
So if you know what your type is, and that again, as you're listening to someone describe the types, you're reading about them, which there's a lot of good resources online. If you just do Enneagram types, there's a lot of free resources. Enneagram Institute and Enneagram Spectrum are my two favorites. But
Oh, great.
so when you feel like the description is being mean to you, that's probably your type. um, it the nature of these descriptions is it's easiest to spot the average or unhealthy levels of the type and expressions of the type.
Mm,
And so that's usually where the typing focuses. It's not like, oh, you're a great person and you're everybody loves you. It's not that, because that's not really as easy to spot. And actually, as we become healthier, we resemble our type less intensely.
mm,
So it can be hard to type someone who has done a lot of work, not just Enneagram work. You can do this through, you know, different kinds of therapy, or just, you know, I don't know, practicing Buddhism. Like, you can kind of get here a lot of different ways,
yeah, yeah.
right? Um, so it's really focused on, here are the problems of each type, right? Here are the sort of negative.
Hmm.
So that's why when people read it, they're like, oh, I don't like it. And that's why usually they come to see me as last resort,
Mm,
because they've tried all the comfortable things. You know, they've tried the positive things, the things that identify you and justify you just being basically exactly as you are, right?
hmm.
Without any call to healing.
Mm,
And then if that's not working, they go and they maybe come to me if someone
yeah.
recommends them, or if they're like, all right, I'm willing to try anything.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, buckle up. We're about to have a ride. So once you can do the work on your own, and I did a
Mm,
lot of the work on my own, but also I've been seeing a therapist for years. I love her. She's trained in Enneagram as well.
that's great.
So that's very helpful. Yeah, a lot of therapists are trained in
Hmm.
it now. Um, and you can do it on your own, but I really suggest learning about it with other people
Mm,
in a community. It can be your spouse, it can be your best friend, it can be a small group of people, but this is the best way to grow, is to do it around other people.
mm,
Because the essential problem of this is that when we are doing these unhealthy behaviors, our level of self-awareness is low.
mm.
So it's hard to spot that you're doing it when your level of self-awareness is low. So if you have other people around who know these patterns, who recognize these, and who you trust to point them out to you, that's really where you start to see the patterns. Like, if I'm hangry, I'm not noticing that I'm criticizing everyone.
Hmm.
I'm In my mind, I'm like, why is everyone doing everything wrong? Right? So there's just a lack of self-awareness. But if someone were to be like, you are sort of in a very black and white thinking right now,
Mm,
Claire, do you need a snack?
yeah.
I would say, oh yeah, okay, I can recognize it now. So we really want to do this in a community of some kind, because it's
Mm,
just so much easier. And what we learn is that, like, all of our fears are related to not being connected to ourselves and other people. So the more we can be connected to ourselves and other people, the healthier we can become.
I love that. That's really great. Um, okay, I'm gonna take what you said. I'm like, okay, I heard you talk about my type. It freaked me out. I'm gonna go research that. I'm going to one of the two sites you listed, the Enneagram Institute or the Enneagram Spectrum. But I get there and there's like a deluge of information. There's
Mm-hmm.
like the numbers and the wings and the three
Yeah.
centers and like the three instincts. I think the Enneagram Institute calls them. So like where should they focus and where should they ignore if they're just getting started?
Yes. So if you're just getting started, don't worry about your wings. Don't worry about your subtype. Don't worry about anything but your dominant type. So we do have
Mm,
all 9 types inside of us, which is a really beautiful concept that I love. But there is one that is calling the shots. And there are usually a few types that aren't really getting a word in at the meeting, and then there's
mm,
some that are getting a little bit more say, but ultimately your dominant type, which we just call your type most of the time,
mm,
is the one thing that is calling the shots. So
mm.
that's where your focus can really home in, because that is where you're going to get the most work. I do see people be tempted to go, okay, yeah, no, I've gotten all that. Let me go look at my wing. And I'm like, you're avoiding.
Mm,
So, yeah, and with each type, there is what's called a vice. And so, if we just worked on this vice and just did the work of spotting everywhere it was in our life,
Hmm.
we would be so far along later on
Hmm.
down the road. So the vices look like, for a one, it's anger. And one's,
Hmm.
when you realize you're a one, you're probably not thinking you're an angry person, right? Because good girls, good boys, they don't get angry.
Hmm.
And then you go, oh, row.
Yeah.
It's everywhere, right? The vice for the four um is
Ego.
no, well, it's sometimes melancholy. I think it's what it
Okay.
usually is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe that's the fixation.
Yeah.
The vice is, oh, sorry, envy.
Envy.
Yeah,
That's it. Yeah. Sorry.
yeah. So envy is the vice for the four, and fours usually go, I'm not envious, and then I
Hmm.
explain what envy is, and they go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I am constantly comparing myself to other people to see where I'm lacking.
Hmm.
Right, like, so if we just did work on the vice, like that, we can look at our type, we can learn about, there's different levels, and we can kind of
Hmm.
start to map out where we are on that. So I think that's a really important map, these levels of development of our type. But to actually do the work, we have to start by being very honest
Hmm.
about where our vice is showing up.
Nice. I like that a lot. Um, and I like that, when you're looking at your own, like focusing in on just your type and not having to worry about like all of the things that come around it until you've really started to solidify and understand who you are in your core. I think that's really
Mm-hmm.
helpful. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so to a quick caveat, um, because, and I, I always want to talk about this if there's anybody who's listening to the Enneagram first time. A lot of experts say don't type other people.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about why that is?
Yes. Okay. So we tend to be very ineffective at guessing another person's motivation. And so that's really why it's unhelpful to type other people. We really shouldn't do it.
Mhm.
And yet,
It's so tempting. You're walking around the world, you have this new superpower of understanding all these numbers.
well, and I think there is actually a time when it can lift us up
Hmm.
to understand, when we really start to understand the types. There are some people's types that you just, every time they open their mouth, you hear it come out, especially once you've studied it for a while, when you've trained in it, you're certified in a few things,
Hmm.
you work with people all the time. It's just, it jumps out at you. If you happen to notice that someone is very likely a type, if that information is helping you be compassionate and helping you
Mm,
connect with them,
yeah.
then I don't see it as necessarily a bad thing.
Okay, that's great. Yeah.
If you notice it, you notice it. Like, what are you supposed to, like, hit the side of your head till it falls out of your ear?
Hmm.
Like it, you notice it, you go, oh, I think I'm dealing with an eight. Okay, I see that, like, this them overwhelming me right now is really like a good offense is a good defense, right?
Hmm.
And so they're probably scared, right? And so I'll just assure them, like, I'm not trying to steal your autonomy.
Mm.
Right? You're all good. You do you, I do me, and we'll see what happens. So
Yeah, yeah.
so if you can use that to help the person in some way, to connect with them, and to increase the compassion within yourself, I think it's a wonderful thing.
I like that. Are there, just out of curiosity, as a one, are there specific types that you like mesh really well with, or specific types you struggle with? Do you see that in the numbers? Like, is there a like, man, these two really work well together, these two struggle together, or is it more individualized than that
I think it's a
generalization?
little bit more individualized than that, and any type that is acting in unhealthy ways is hard to be around.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, any type that's very healthy is a pleasure to be around.
Mm.
It's just because they're bringing gifts, they're bringing, no one's going to be like, oh no, not joy, unless you're very unhealthy.
Yeah.
So I think that that's the main thing. But it is also very interesting when we notice that there's a type that just makes our eye twitch.
Mm.
There's information there,
Yeah.
right? Generally, that's a part of ourselves that we aren't allowing ourselves to connect with,
Yeah.
right? It's either it's unflattering and we don't want to look at it, or it's telling us something about ourselves when we're really
Hmm.
annoyed by a specific type. and some sort of trait. Sometimes it's just we had a parent that is that type and it didn't go well.
That's super true. Yeah.
So it's not about them, right? And so I think that really can we can depersonalize that when we take responsibility for okay, if there's a type that I really just am not having a moment with right now,
Mm.
it's just we're not vibing. What is that telling me about myself?
Yeah, well, I love that because it allows you to, make every relationship fresh and new. In that, like, I might have
Mhm.
struggled with this type of person before, but it doesn't mean I have to struggle with this type of person again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there have been times when I was like, I just can't deal with this type right now because I'm dealing with that type inside of me. Right?
Yeah.
That is the thing that is coming up that I'm doing battle with right now. And to see someone else, you know, have the same issues occurring,
hmm
but not really seeming to be engaging with them in any sort of meaningful way is
mm
just more than I can take right now. But then later on, it's like, all right, now I can be around this person. It was never about them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that really helps build community. And when you can see that someone is that person that's just driving you crazy is afraid, it's a
Mm.
lot easier to feel sympathetic for them. And I think we need a lot more compassion um, happening within the indie author community and the just author community at large, and
Yeah.
understanding that a lot of people are afraid right now.
Yeah. Well, and just like you were saying in the world in general, things are nuts right now. So just
Yeah,
being able to
humans are
recenter and
not built for this.
no.
It is not us, it's
Yeah.
society.
Yeah.
So we're all a little freaked out. All of us are maybe not on our best behavior all the time.
hmm
And, even if you just bring your full self to a situation, there's going to be conflict. Two people bring their full self to a situation together, there's going to be conflict,
hmm
right? Because people have conflicting needs and all these other things. And so it's just you do you, the other person's going to do what they're going to do, and sometimes we're all just afraid together.
Yeah. And then I think, going back to what you said at the beginning, understanding that, we have different worldview glasses on and like
Mm-hmm.
getting that picture. So a lot of times when I talk to authors about Enneagram, they want to go straight to building characters.
Mm-hmm.
What do you find helpful versus not helpful about using the Enneagram to build characters?
I basically find everything about the Enneagram to be really helpful building
Okay, well,
characters.
not biased at all.
I know. You've come to the wrong place if I'm like, oh no, Enneagram, screw that.
Yeah, it's really
That's
funny.
corporate astrology. Um, yeah, so the main thing is motivation, understanding your character's motivations. We
hmm
are puppet masters as authors. We are trying to move them, not just physically, but cognitively move them, emotionally move them,
hmm
so that all of that lines up and they do things that make sense, right? So we instinctually recognize the 9 types. And
Yeah.
we instinctually recognize when someone's motivation has changed inexplicably in a story, all
hmm
right? And so what often happens is that an author will find a character they really like. Let's say, oh, I really like Wolverine. I want to write a Wolverine type character, right? Or, I love Wonder Woman. So I want like a
hmm
Wonder Woman character. And so they'll bring this character in, sort of, maybe it'll be different. Maybe it's like uh, maybe you're watching Murder She Wrote and you're like, I want a character from, right? So you bring them in, but you're not aware that their core motivation is different from yours.
hmm
And so what happens is it tends to blend, especially with the protagonists, where we see a lot more of them and their sort of inner workings. And that character talks like you,
hmm
not like that character.
Yeah.
That character, you're in a big, turning point. They need to make a decision, and you think, what would I do here? Well, it's not you, because you would make this decision very differently.
hmm
You would not, this character is not going to be motivated by that fear that would motivate you. They're not going to
hmm
behave like a Looney Tune in the same way that, in the same situation that would make you behave like a Looney Tune.
Yeah.
So when those two things start to blend and we're not really aware of it, that's when people start to feel like, who even is this character? Right? This
hmm
character is just like this mix. It doesn't even feel, it feels like the character is just a plot device.
Yeah. It starts to
Um,
feel unrealistic. Like this
yeah,
character
and
doesn't
it's
mesh. Yeah.
right. And then it's like, oh, that character would never do that,
hmm
right? which I think was the problem with the last two seasons of Game of Thrones television show,
Yeah.
is that the core motivations were pretty consistent. And then things started happening, and you're like, why did they do that? Well, they did that because they wanted to move the plot along, not because those characters' motivations compelled it to be that way, you know?
Hmm.
So that's the kind of trouble that we start to run into when we're not aware of how different that very core, it's like an operating system. We have different operating systems.
Yeah.
And so if you're meshing the two, you're going to have some glitches.
Yeah. That makes sense. I speaking of like that, like you're talking about that character growth and how like finding that like movement from pain to health in a character through the Enneagram,
Mm-hmm.
just to offer a resource that you had mentioned the Enneagram Institute. They have great charts at the end of each type that say like, here's how it behaves in unhealth, and here's how the type behaves
Mm-hmm.
in health. So if you're asking yourself like, how does my character grow and change through a story, that's a really quick, like great resource to be like, oh, I want a 9, so this is like, these are what 9s look like in unhealth and
Mm-hmm.
health. It's like a great character growth arc. Do you
Yeah,
find your
and so,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
well, and so you can make sure that you're giving the character the ending they need and not the
Yeah.
one that you need.
Yeah, and then an ending that, like you were saying, is synchronous with who they are, so that
Mm-hmm.
we don't get Game of Thrones, the end of Game of Thrones. Do you find yourself when you're watching shows and movies and reading books that you're typing characters?
Oh yeah, all bets are off on that night not typing other people thing when I'm watching TV.
Yeah, well, they're not real people, so we can do whatever we want.
Right. I'm
Yeah,
like, that's a 6, that's a 9, that's a
it's
7,
really,
and yeah. Oh,
yeah,
my husband loves it.
that's really funny. You find any recently?
Let's see, what was I watching recently? Oh, I like to watch a lot of true crime. And so
Okay.
I will type people on true crime, which I'm not supposed to do because they're real people. But I feel like it's a fictional enough depiction where I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, that detective's definitely an 8, and that one is definitely a 1. Um, I like typing characters in the Inspector Gamache
Okay.
novels.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, anything I'm reading. If a book is so engrossing that I forget to type, that's a good book.
that's funny. Yeah, there's certain shows I watch too where I'm like, oh, I this writer knows the Enneagram.
Oh,
Like
oh yeah,
you're in.
yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. You know, behind the scenes,
yeah,
it's happening.
yeah. I'm
Oh, The
convinced.
Boys.
Yeah, The
Most
Boys is a
recent.
good one. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Would you put any of those characters in a type?
I would, but not. I'm not going to say it
You're not gonna
because
say it
people that type will
publicly?
be so offended. No one wants to
That's
be
really funny.
Homelander's type.
That's super true. Yeah, I will say, and I can say this because it's me. My wife and I watched Ozark together on Netflix, and that is the
Mm-hmm.
best depiction of a 6 and an 8 I've ever seen in a married couple.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, they're
Oh
the
my gosh.
they line up.
I will say, the Deep is definitely a 4.
Yeah, deep as a 4. Yeah, that's really, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Or we were watching Outlander together recently, and
Mm.
she's convinced that the lead heroine is a 5. That's her
Oh,
like,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
well,
Uh huh.
yeah, Claire's her name. She's convinced Claire's a
Mm-hmm.
5. um anyway, yeah, that's fun. Okay, so one kind of last personal question to like, and I'm asking because I want people to like kind of see how you, as a knowing your type, has helped you kind of move things through. So you just started a
Mm-hmm.
podcast in an insane time in like history, the world, all of that stuff.
Uh-huh.
What did you feel like launching that out? Like, and how did you like manage, wrangle your type so that you could do it in a healthy way? Because it is a very healthy it's a great podcast. You do a great job with it. So
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, what was that like for you as a 1?
Okay. So it's scary. It's scary, but there are different kinds of fear, right? There's the fear that tells you not to put your hand on the campfire,
Yeah.
right? And then there's the kind of fear that you begin to feel before you're about to do something meaningful,
Mm,
right? And so when I thought about the podcast, I knew I'd have to do it. I did Selmer Book Show for years, and then I was like, got off. I was like, I feel compelled to continue to do this, but I
mhm.
don't know what yet. Um, and once I came up with the premise for What If for authors, which is just each episode I take a what if, that
Nice.
what if this terrible thing happens that I've been worrying about, and we talk through it, and
Hmm.
by the end, hopefully everyone's feeling like, oh, if it happens, I can deal with it.
Hmm.
Um, once I thought of that, I was like, this is exactly what I need to do. And I know all the questions because I've been coaching people on all these same questions
Hmm.
over and over again. Um, so once my purpose was clear enough and I thought, oh yeah, that has to exist, then I was like, all right, it's time to get over your crap, Claire. It's time
Mm,
to it's time to deal with this to the point where you can do it and recognize that there's not going to be a point where the fear stops.
mm,
You just have to decide there's something more important than the fear. And the fears, our core fears are ego fears.
hmm.
They're not real fears. They're not, I mean, they are very real, but they're not, we don't die if we get criticized,
Mm,
right? So they become these very overblown things. It's like, um, I had this fear of snakes to the point where if I was walking, I looked down, I was about to step on a rope, I would freak out, right? Because
hmm.
I thought it was a snake on the ground. But it's just a rope,
Hmm.
right? And so a lot of our fears are just the rope, just the, the discarded cable on the ground that we thought was a snake.
Mm,
And so I, I thought, how do I do this in a way that is not going to be too much for me? Because when we're facing our fears, what we don't necessarily want to do is jump in the deep end because
mm.
that can actually be too much too fast, right? And then
Yeah.
it's traumatic. Um, so I came up with a scenario of, okay, I'll pre-record them, right? I'll record a
Mhm.
bunch of just me talking. For me, I have to write down a lot of notes ahead of time, and I work off those notes, and I do a lot of talking and then being like, oh no, Emily, cut that out. And
Mhm.
then, so it has to be edited for me. So that's comfortable. And so when I could really say, okay, this is the environment where I've done enough where it's not jumping in the deep end, but I'm still
Mm.
scared, then I can move forward. Because it's like I know what this fear is, right?
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just me trying to protect my ego and not feel like a bad
Hmm.
person, but ultimately this is more important
Hmm.
for than me feeling a certain way,
Yeah.
than like my desperate, brain's attempt to tell me that if I get something wrong, I'm gonna die.
Mm.
I'm gonna get something wrong. So that's the big fear. I'm gonna talk and I'm gonna say something, and I know that like my type's gonna come through.
Mm.
Some people are gonna read it as, my dark jokes, is gonna feel like criticism.
Hmm.
And that's going to turn some people away.
Mm.
And I have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
I have known for years that I'm not for everyone. So
Hmm.
what's the holdup, right? So I just kind of had to force myself to put a bunch of bag a bunch of episodes,
Hmm.
give them to my editor. She edits them, and I don't even think about them anymore. So I had to create a process that minimized the fear to a point where I could sit beside it and continue.
Mm.
So that
Okay.
was that was the process for me, and then I don't ever listen to the episodes again.
Yeah. I can't. I know people who listen to their own podcast. I'm like, I don't even know what that is. I can't do that. Yeah.
No,
No.
people would ask me stuff about the Selmer Book Show when I was on it. I was like, I don't listen to that.
No. Like, no, the last thing I want to hear is my own voice. I actually even struggle to make clips for social media because I'm like, I don't
Uh
want to
huh.
see myself on
Yeah,
the, yeah.
I have to outsource all of that. I mean, I can push through and do a lot of work of like, Claire, your voice is perfect.
Mhm.
People love this voice. All this
Yeah.
like self talk, and then
Self
I'm like, why would
affirmations.
I?
Yeah.
Why would I do that?
Yeah. That's
Why
really
would I do
funny.
that when I could just pay someone else to do it
Yeah.
and then, save that effort for something else?
Yeah. Yeah. That's fun. Um, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on. And I'm gonna say people should definitely go buy your two books. I've read them, they're both fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Um
Thank you.
and all this stuff on the web is at ffs dot media. Sorry, my
Yes.
dyslexic side is not getting those. You give me a sequence of something, I'm like, I can't do it. ffs dot media is
Yeah.
where everything is.
Mhm.
If somebody wants to just jump in and get started with what you're doing, where's the best place to engage?
Oh, well, I do have a Liberated Writer course, 5-week course coming up if someone wants to dive in the deep end. That comes with the IEQ 9 questionnaire, which
Nice.
is, yeah, it's a solid questionnaire.
Hmm.
It'll give you your type, subtype, and all this other information. Then we spend 5 weeks going through it together, learning about it, and we do 2 hour and a half live calls a week for five
That's
weeks.
great.
So if someone wants to really just go in there, is like, I'm ready for change. The Liberated Writer course, you can go to liberatedwriter.com
Okay.
and find it there.
Awesome. Yeah. And again, if anybody listening to this, like, started getting the feels when you were talking about managing stress and chaos in the world, um, go check that out. It's an important
Yeah,
book.
and it's hard work, but it's all towards this path toward liberation, is what
Hmm.
we call it.
Yeah.
And it's feeling that armor removed from you so that you can move, so that
Mm.
life just feels less heavy. And so there's so many rewards, and people are like, well, why would I work this hard? Because you're going to be free of all of
Yep.
these things that have been causing you suffering.
Hmm.
Not forever. You don't reach a finish line and you're, enlightened or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I just think that there's so much relief in it. I wouldn't do it if it was just masochistic or,
Mm. Yeah.
anything like that. But there's so much relief that I've found in my life. And I just am like, I just want everyone, to get that relief.
Mm. That's great. That's a great last note to end on. So I'm going to hit stop and you and I can talk a little bit more.